Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. Gavin, Alex Wolf, and today we are joined by Jayson Buford, an incredible writer for GQ, Rolling Stone, and SB Nation. He recently penned a piece titled "Why Tom Thibodeau is the Wrong Coach for the New York Knicks." Alex, we'll get into that and so much more with him.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Thibs. Ironically enough, what we like about Thibs to start the show. Then talk about some of the flaws of his coaching process. Talk about whether getting some more, strong-minded assistants, some hand-picked assistants back to replace Mike Woodson and Kenny Payne might help Tom Thibodeau. And then finish off with Jayson's plan for the Knicks offseason and how he would go about addressing their needs this coming summer. All that's coming up next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. I want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. If you weren't caught up, now you are. We are available on all platforms, including on YouTube. So if you want to see our smiling, sometimes excitable faces, tune in there, throw us a subscription. I promise it's a whole lot of fun on YouTube. We got a ton of great comments of late. We really appreciate everyone who does that. Please guys, keep that up. We'll interact with you guys in the comments. It's a whole lot of fun. But who's talking to you? I'm Gavin, a play-by-play broadcaster, currently covering high school lacrosse for the Varsity Media Sports Network. He is Alex Wolf, editor-in-chief of The Strickland. We find on Twitter and other social media at thestrick.land, the best Knicks website out there. And let's get into it with Jayson. Without further ado, talking why Tom Thibodeau does some good stuff, but ultimately isn't the right coach for the New York Knicks. You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. And as promised, we are joined by Jayson Buford. He is a writer at a whole lot of places, including Rolling Stone, GQ, Vice, and most importantly for our purposes today, SB Nation. A fantastic article making the case on why Tom Thibodeau is not the right man to coach the New York Knicks. Anyone who listens to this podcast knows that's the sentiment we are very much on board with. Jayson, clearly a Knicks fan. Whose jersey is that?
Anthony Mason.
Oh, good one. I, again, love the piece. So I'm going to start off with kind of a counterintuitive question given the piece. Just because I think this is the world we're going to be living in. What do you like about Tom Thibodeau as a coach?
Two things in particular. Every single time the Knicks are playing a game, they are ready to go. They have a strategy. They have defensive systems in place. They have offensive system in place. They pretty much know the other team's strengths and weaknesses. They're ready to go, right? He gets players ready to go. There's no one who prepares more than Tom Thibodeau, like straight up. He is a really legitimate hard worker. And you could tell that from last year. You could still tell that from this year, even though they struggled. You know what I mean? Like, they never struggled because they showed up and they didn't know what the opposing team's tendencies were, and they just didn't. They weren't ready to play. Like, they were ready to play, just they weren't really that good. So that's the first thing. The second thing is he clearly has instilled a work ethic amongst the young players and amongst the team in general that has not always been there with other coaches. I mean, the players are there in the gym 24/7. RJ, Quickly, OB, those guys, they're animals. Grimes, they're just like Thibs. Literally, they're just like Thibs. And now you could say that's Leon, drafting well and drafting the right guys, but I'll give that credit to Thibs, right? Like, Katz had a really good article. Our beat writer for the Athletics, Katz is great. Katz had a really good article where he said, I think this is partly done as a like they shouldn't fire Thibs thing, but it still was a good article. It was essentially said like we got players who work with Thibs, kind of like this group that works with Thibs during practice for like an hour or 45 minutes, and it's like Thibs is much more hands-on with the rookies than he has been in the past. And so that checks out. It definitely does check out. And he's, been outspoken about how much he likes Quickly and Obi and all those guys. He thinks they're good kids. And so I do think those are the two things where it's like, clearly this is a coach who cares. He gives a shit, right? Like, you know what I mean? We've had coaches in the past. Fizdale was my biggest one. Hornacek was another one. You just care, or they're just like out here, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, Thibs actually cares. You can tell he's like a really hard worker as a coach, and like lives and dies by basketball. And like, yeah, you know, it those strengths that he has. It magnifies all of his flaws, like how bad his flaws are. It really does. So,
yeah, you know, if we're going to be talking about the strengths too, you know, you had mentioned this in your piece, which I'll just plug real quick. Tom Thibodeau is the wrong coach for the Knicks, as the title is on SB Nation.
mm-hmm.
Came out like a little over, I guess about 2 weeks ago now.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that you had noted in there is, and you know, it sort of goes lockstep with what you were just saying, is that Thibs has this tendency to occasionally find really good things. Like, for example, the Quickly and Rose pairing for Quickly's rookie year was amazing. You know, they played with energy, you know, pace, and Rose could penetrate. Quickly could, you know, shoot or, you know, dish the ball himself some. You know, there was just.
I also, if I may, they really missed Rose this year. Like,
oh yeah,
yeah. They probably won about 40 games with Rose playing this year, I think.
Definitely.
It's possible, you know, depending on how well his body would hold up, you know, maintenance and everything. It did seem to me like they had a more of a commitment to playing Rose like 20 to 25 minutes this year, which maybe limits. Yeah, but you know, the Thibs would have still played him like 30, 35 minutes if that.
Yeah, and just game. And I think it kind of would have had a domino reaction in terms of we wouldn't have to have Burks out there.
Yeah,
you know, a lot of different things that I think went wrong are exasperated by Rose not being there.
Yeah, for sure.
So I yeah.
But to get back to the point I was gonna say, like, basically, you know, Thibs finds these good things sometimes, and it's almost reminiscent, like that pairing in particular, and like some of the success of the bench and how well they work together is almost reminiscent of like Mike Woodson stumbling into the Carmelo at the 4 thing and having that turn into like this huge success for the 12-13 Knicks.
Yes.
But then, you know, it's like Thibs shows you sometimes that he's not, it's certainly not inept or anything. You know, it's not like Fizdale where you see that he is going out there with basically no plan, or he finds like one somewhat. Yeah, it's like he'll do like just one semi-decent thing and, you know, have it sort of work out for him. Like Fizdale had that the little like blitz defense that he figured out that worked for him for one game, and then proceeded to use it on like 6 straight teams and just get absolutely shelled by the next 5, you know? And it's not like that with Thibs. You see that he knows what he's doing at times, but then his stubbornness just gets in the way. I mean, how much more frustrating does it make the overall Thibs experience for a year like this year when you see that he does actually have the ability to like find things sometimes, you know, like the Quick and Rose pairing?
Yeah, I mean, it makes it all the more frustrating, right? When you see someone who's clearly competent, but can't move past their own mental deficiencies, right? Thibs is competent. He's a competent head coach. He seriously is. Like, you can't win 60 games in an NBA regular season without knowing what you're doing. You know what I mean? Like, and yes, it is always relying on him playing his starters a lot, and it is relying on him playing hard. You know, we play hard in every single 82 game regular season. So yeah, you can say that he's an 82 game coach, but still, it does matter, right? And like, he can be an exceptionally good regular season coach, but unfortunately, he is so stubborn that he was not able to make the correct adjustments this year. And those same adjustments, I think, will be in place to make next year. And that's why I think we need to change. That's why I think we're not going to. So that's why I think we needed to change our coach.
All right, we'll be right back with Jayson getting into the gripes about Thibs. Enough of this talking about what we like about him. But first, I got to remind you all that today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. All right, NBA fans, are you looking for a daily fantasy option for the NBA? Then you need to try the award-winning app Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. I love this, and I know you will too. Prize Picks is easy to use. You pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry, and it's just you versus the projected numbers. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It really is that easy. PrizePicks is safe and offers fast withdrawals, and you can use the award-winning app on both the App Store and Google Play if you're an Android fella like me. So PrizePicks also allows mixed sport entries. And one of my favorite features, because when both the Knicks and the Mets are in season, I can bet the under on Alec Burks assists and the over on Francisco Lindor home runs. Eat it, everybody. Francisco Lindor is good, and his contract is good, and he's amazing. And I love being a Mets fan right now. So you can make any sort of mixed sport entry that you want to. For a limited time, PrizePicks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all of our users. Users get $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point. That's really easy, really, really easy. But you must use code NBA. That's right. This is an exclusive offer available to Locked On fans. Sign up today and use code NBA to get $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point.
Yeah, there's something to be said, right, for a guy that, I mean, usually we talk about this in terms of players, but with Thibs, I think you can talk about in terms of a coach, a guy who maxes out his abilities and it's still not good enough. Like, there's no question that Thibs is doing his best. I think is what you're getting at, right? Like you trust him when he says, like, he watches the games 5 times. Like he doesn't sleep. He doesn't have a wife. Maybe doesn't have much of a social life. Like he is completely locked in. And it's still not enough because he doesn't see the right thing. Like I saw a shout out to Jonathan Macri, saw the stat today that Alec Burks was top 10 in the NBA in clutch time minutes this season. Emmanuel Quickley the whole year was 6th on the Knicks in clutch time minutes, playing 80 total. Obi Toppin played 20 total clutch time minutes this year. And we got this, it was like this painful revelation at the end of the year, right? Like, oh, like this isn't all in our heads. And it isn't just noise that like all the plus minus stats all year indicated that those guys were incredibly impactful players. Like they were just genuinely like turning the corner into being, if not stars, at the very least starters in the NBA, but they never got that from Thibs. And I guess, Jason, this is maybe an unfair question because it's asking you to get into the mind of like an insane person to some extent. But I know in your article, you kind of attributed that to a lack of ability of talent evaluation. And to me, it's that. And it's also like, it's this weird thing, and maybe this ties into stubbornness where, and this is psychoanalysis that I'm probably not qualified for, but it always feels like he craves security. And there's something about the young guys where that isn't there. But then he failed to see that Alec Burks, who was statistically, I think, like the worst clutch time player in the NBA in terms of plus minus, and for guards was just about the worst finisher at the rim. And Julius Randle made mistake after mistake. It's like he could only see it when that happened to the younger guys. And when it happened to the older guys, it was as if it never happened.
Right. Yeah. I think with the older guys, he chalks it up to like it being a mistake. And the younger guys, he chalks it up to it being a referendum of like, that you shouldn't play.
Their youth, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I mean? And so I don't think that's something that can change. I just think that's something that's been distilled in him for some reason. There's this philosophy. And like he comes from that Riley Van Gundy school where those guys as coaches, this was, right. This is in Riley's book. This was Van Gundy's huge on this. They're huge on loyalty. They're huge on their guys, right? Riley kept Starks in the game in Game 7, and I'm dating myself here, but right, or not really because I wasn't even born. But Riley kept Starks in Game 7, even though Starks was bugging, because Starks had come through in the past, right? Like they care a lot about loyalty, right? And you saw Thibs put in Gibson at the 5 sometimes instead of playing Obi and Randall together, which I thought he should have done earlier in the season because Thibs cares tremendously about people who have come through for him in the past. That's like his whole thing. That's his whole culture, right? Like this Thibs culture is based off of like leadership and like these guys have been with me and like Derrick Rose has been with me, so I'm going to trade for him and I need my guys, and that's all good and that has its merits, and it's clearly been successful in some ways for the Knicks. But this season, he needed to spice it up in order for them to be successful, and he just could not do that.
Yeah, the the ill-founded spice that he did find was Alec Burks. I'm trying to think of like a good reference, like putting, I don't know, like cayenne pepper on a PB&J. Although I don't know, maybe that would kind of be good. I don't know, that's probably not good enough. But anyway, he found the wrong spice for the recipe this year with Alec Burks at point guard.
Burks as a point guard was not good. He didn't get into the sets fast enough. He didn't push the ball enough. He played with poor pace. He's best successful as a half-court scorer off the bench. Burks was in a perfect spot last year. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And
half-court scorer, can mix it up a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like you want to play to the strengths of your players, and it seemed like Thibs recognized the strength of Burks to get into the lane, but didn't recognize that once he got in there, he was basically useless. It was like, he couldn't see past the one skill that he really wanted, in that Burks was like the guy that could best get downhill, which is what he likes out of that spot. Whereas Quickly actually found ways to get to the rim more effectively, but just was not doing it in the way that Thibs is accustomed to. He's accustomed to lightning fast Derrick Rose, or like Burks has a little bit of that where he can, sort of take a screen at the 3-point line and make his way all the way to the rim. He just has no idea what to do once he gets there. Whereas Quickly kind of plods his way in there and pokes and prods and eventually gets in and then makes something happen, whether it's kicking out somebody or finishing a layup himself or shooting a floater, which really came back to him late in the season finally, after it had sort of been, his floater had been slumping a little bit all the way dating back to last season. I think that Burks, the whole Burks Quickly thing, and it's just like the Payton thing, you could say the Payton Rose thing in the first year coaching the team. It just sort of underscored, I think, the biggest issue with Thibs, which maybe is just that his biggest hangup is the point guard position. And I don't know. I mean, I guess this would be another thing I think that's important to discuss now that we're basically resigning ourselves to Thibs being back next year, because it does seem like that's where the reporting is pointing. There have certainly not been any other rumblings about him maybe getting fired or anything this offseason since the season ended. And there was a report with maybe 10 games left that he was going to stick around. What do you think is, like, if you had to nail down like the one biggest thing that you think Thibs needs to work on, and it could be micro or macro, what do you think it would be going into next season, assuming that the Knicks are bringing him back, which it seems pretty clear that they are?
Yeah. They would have fired him already if they weren't bringing him back.
Exactly. Yeah.
Leon including him in the letter was like, oh wait, there's no way they're firing him. I honestly don't even think that report that came out that Wesley was Worldwide West was blaming Thibs for the struggles this season, I think was a little bit overblown. It's clear that they never really thought about firing him. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, they never really thought about it. I think his talent evaluation must get better. I think he needs to have someone on the staff that will push him to see past his blind spots. I think he needs someone on the staff that will push him to see how effective Quickly is out there. Despite the fact that, Thibs loves bigger guards. That's really what it is. He loves bigger guards, right?
Yeah.
Loves them. But the best option was Quickly, right? When Rose went down, the best option was Quickly. And it was clear. It's clear. Any other coach would have made that decision. But because he has this view of what he does, it is not he did not make that move, right? And so I think that the number one thing is he needs to get better talent evaluation and just managing a roster that isn't structured to his exact way, right? Like last year's team was structured exactly the way he wants it. This year's team, I think, took a little bit more finesse, right? There was not one player this year that was dramatically better than the other players, right? Unlike last year when Randall was right. This year, a lot of the players have the same talent level. Anyone on any given night could be the team's best player. Obi was the team best player some nights. Fournier was the team best player some nights. RJ was the team best player some nights. Quickly was. Rose was. Those 6, even Grimes one night was the team best player, right? Those 6 guys, Burks, so those 7 guys could be the team best player on any given night. You can add Mitch in there if you want to, right? So that's 8. So that means, as a coach, you need to figure out a way to ride those guys when they're playing well, right? But because he has this structure, and I'm sure that Thibs knows what he wants to do before the game even begins, right? Thibs is a rapper who doesn't even look at the beat. He just writes his songs and, doesn't really care what the beat
looks like. It's a great analogy.
Yeah. Sounds like. Yeah. Thibs is, Thibs is that type of rapper.
All right, guys, we want to ask Jayson what his dream offseason looks like. We get into an interesting conversation on all that, on Jalen Brunson, and a whole lot more in just a sec. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about one of our all-time favorites here at Locked On Knicks, betonline.net. They're your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. You can find all the latest sports development, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. And Alex, I'm a big fan of how quickly they update their odds with new information, namely of late, the injuries to Devin Booker and Chris Middleton affecting the NBA title odds. They have the Warriors as favorites at 11-4, the Celtics at 9-2, the Suns at 9-2, the Heat at 7-1, the Bucks at 9-1. To me, I know they have a harder path than the Warriors. I think the Celtics, it pains me to say it, I think they're easy money. They're so clearly the best team in the NBA now that Devin Booker is out. They've dominated defensively. I think since the 40th game of the season, they would have tied for the highest net rating in NBA history. To me, that's automatic cash. Alex, I see you're getting ready to vomit, so I'll continue with this ad read. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. And now back to more with Jayson. Yeah, I think what we're ultimately talking about is him having some flexibility, and that's right. And the thing is, what's tough, and to your point, on why he has some appeal still, is because he gets buy-in, right? More than anything else. Like these guys believe in him. I was listening to RJ Barrett on JJ Redick's podcast, and he just came out and said he could, obviously most guys aren't going to go on a podcast and trashed our head coach, but he could have been, he's fine, whatever. But he's like, no, that's my dude. You guys don't get it. You guys don't see how he works. And I think at every stop he's earned respect. And I do believe, despite us talking about again and again, how he's sort of playing out the same issues that doomed him in Chicago and Minnesota. To the point of Fred's article, he has changed in that, I think he does really invest in the young guys, and it's hard to tell how much of it is lip service, because he's kind of tried to put out through Mark Berman and maybe through that Fred Katz article this offseason that I sort of regret not playing the young guys more. And you listen to the press conference he had after Quickly and Obi went off, and he's talking about how proud he is of those guys and the work that they put in behind the scenes. So it's kind of easy to trick yourself into believing it'll be different next year. But it all depends on roster composition and whether he still has those veteran options, because I think it's sort of fool me once. I think we know at this point, he's always if there's in any world where it's relatively close, he's always going to fall back on those guys. And I think even more so than Burks, Elfrid Payton was sort of the ultimate evidence of that. Because Stan Van Gundy had this tweet the other day, Knicks fans weren't criticizing him a year ago. We were losing our minds about Elfrid Payton playing all of last season. But they were winning despite it. And I think that's the thing. The Knicks were, I know I'm going all over the place here, but they were number one in defense by a pretty decent margin post All-Star break. With Julius Randle off the court all year, they were far and away the best defense in the NBA. It wasn't even close. And that's buy-in, that's structure, because the Knicks didn't have crazy defensive talent. That's Thibs being a really good coach. And to your point, Jayson, you get the right guy in there that gives you just a little, pushes him in terms of creativity, offensively, and says hey, it's okay if you play Obi Toppin at the 5 occasionally, and give up a little bit defensively, because the offense is going to explode in that scenario. And guys will ride to the ends of the earth for him. And if he's willing to use that to his advantage and have this ability to adjust game to game, and more so within games, I think this can still end well. I don't know about you. I'm just not quite optimistic that that's going to happen.
No, I'm not either. I'm not optimistic at all. In fact, I'm very cynical on it, right? This guy's been the same way throughout his career. What makes this next year different, right? His 9th season as a head coach, right? Like, or 10th season, or whatever it is as a head coach. What's going to make this season different? I just don't see it. I just don't see it. Like, you could say that next year he'll realize his mistake this year and play them more. We'll see what the offseason entails. I don't think they're going to be able to trade Randall. That's just my gut. My gut says Randall's probably here next year again. And he can't play worse. So he'll probably be a little better next year. But still, I still don't think that means that Thibs should be off the hook. Nor do I think it means that he is going to change his ways just because he realized that this year he should have played the younger kids more. I think that people fall back into their habits because their habits are more comfortable for them. That's the way it works. That's the way human nature is. So.
Yeah, you could almost say Thibs has an addictive personality for his veteran players. He strives to keep going back to that well over and over because it's what's worked for him in the past. But I almost wonder, I'm going to be very curious to see what's going to happen with the Knicks coaching staff this coming offseason, right? They've lost some very important, coaches off of their staff that were hand-selected by Leon Rose and company to come in and assist Thibs. They lost Kenny Payne, who went to the college ranks, and also Mike Woodson, who went to the college ranks to be head coaches. And I wouldn't be surprised if Johnny Bryant takes a couple phone calls this offseason about potentially moving somewhere else. And that sort of begs the question, like, is the solution here maybe just finding that right mix of coaches that Thibs will somewhat listen to again, because I did feel like there was more outside of the Payton thing, which obviously was like Thibs's grand blind spot of, the last season. They played really well, and the whole team played hard for him. It seemed like guys were getting coached up a lot by guys that they respected in Woodson and
historically,
and
Thibs, the players love Thibs historically, right?
Yes.
Like NBA players, they're not. NBA players have this like there's just like not rumor, but rather this stereotype that's attached to NBA players of like they're hard to coach and this and that. Like, no, I mean, they're professionals, right? Like, Thibs treats these guys like human beings. He treats these guys like men. You know what I mean? They treat him like men, like a man. You know what I mean? So, like, I think players historically have loved playing for him, right? Rose, I mean, and those guys are following him. Rose, Gibson, Noah has nothing but great things to say, right? Like, really, Butler still loves Thibs. Really, the only Wiggins actually came out and one of his biggest things was like, I remember Wiggins had said, I love playing for Thibs. I thought that, when I played for Thibs, like, structure was huge for me, and like he was very good for me. The only guy who really didn't like playing for Thibs was Towns. Only guy. And I think that was more Butler. I think that was more Thibs liking Butler and bringing Butler in than like Towns hating Thibs. You know what I mean? And so it doesn't surprise me that the players buy in, of course. You know what I mean? Like, they play hard. Seems like a little bit more of a interesting personality than he's given credit for, but I just don't think he's going to make any adjustments. So I think because we don't have one set superstar in this team, it's not a team in which, okay, you play these guys and you're going to always, this guy's always going to be good at the end of the game. This guy's always, you know what I mean? We don't have any LeBrons on our team. You don't have any guys who are like so outstandingly consistent that they should always play at this particular time. What we have, we have kind of a herky-jerky squad, right? Like a hot and cold type of team, a streaky type of team. And so he needs to kind of figure out how to put all these guys in the same in an ability to be successful in a different but collective way. And I don't think he has done that. So
yeah, and that sort of gets back to what I was, I wonder if there just needs to be some other hand-selected assistant coaches that just like he has
I
his
think Woody
players
might have.
that
Woody was probably huge. Don't you think Woody
yeah.
was huge for him in his first year? Yeah, right.
Oh, absolutely. Because Woody's always been a player's coach too, just like
Mhm.
Thibs is, but also might have had sort of the cachet to sort of, be like a big enough voice in the room that Thibs might actually sort of respect some of what he has to say, or respect if players are saying, hey, we like what Woody's saying. Can we do this in a game? Whereas I don't necessarily get that same vibe off Johnny Bryant and stuff. Like it just
Right.
doesn't seem like I can imagine Johnny Bryant as a guy who's very guard focused had to have been banging the drum all year of like, let's get quickly more minutes. I think he's got more to offer, and then to see Thibs kind of not do that until his hand was absolutely forced. So I am going to be really curious to see what happens this coming off season as far as, will Leon and, Worldwide West, maybe Worldwide West actually was kind of unsatisfied with what Thibs was doing this year. Will they go
Oh, I
out of
bet
their
he
way?
was. Yeah, especially because West
Yeah,
is a Kentucky guy, so I bet he
exactly.
was. But I don't think that they were ever considering firing him. Really, I don't think that was
At
ever.
least Leon wasn't. But like,
Yes, Leon wasn't. I don't think. Yeah.
yeah. But so will they go out of their way again to sort of repopulate his staff with bigger name assistants that aren't Tibbs's guys that he's been rolling with for the last decade or so, his comfort zone that will sort of be opposing voices. And I wonder if maybe, much like how it was in the first year, where I do feel like Mike Woodson and Kenny Payne, especially Kenny Payne's influence on Julius Randle and all that was like a huge, huge thing. And I don't think it's coincidental that Randle's season took its final tailspin like right after Kenny Payne left for Louisville.
Yeah.
It,
Can't be.
if they decide to go with some bigger name assistants like that again and sort of try to guide Thibs in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have to, right? Like, I mean, it's the definition of insanity running. I think this only ends one way if they run it back,
You don't have
right?
a choice.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, same. I mean, it's we could be doing the same podcast about Randall. Like, it can only end one way if you run it back. But I guess given that, Jason, outside of a new coach, at least on my end, I'll wrap up on this. What does your ideal offseason look like for the Knicks?
Oof. How do y'all feel about Brunson? I'm conflicted. You guys go first.
I'll keep it brief because we've talked about him a lot lately.
Oh,
but
really?
like, I think, his performances right now in the playoffs are maybe swaying me more towards going for him. I said this, and some people were like, "Oh, it's crap," because people love Derrick Rose. But my general opinion is, if you're going to sign Jalen Brunson, you kind of have to look to move Derrick Rose if you want to invest any time in Emmanuel Quickly, because with Brunson and Rose both on the team, Quickly will never see the floor next year. Period. I mean, that's just how it's going to. Or he'll get his usual like 10, 15 minutes a game, which I think we saw this year. Like he could be capable of a lot more than that. So I go back and forth. I really think Brunson is really talented. I think he might be making a turn as maybe not a star, but like a near star. And there's also a world where I could see him turning into like Kyle Lowry. That's like maybe a multi-time all-star, not a guy you would ever necessarily put in your top 10 or even, fringe top 20-ish, but who's always just like really good and really consistent and gives you the same thing every single night. I think there's a chance he ends up that way. So basically, I'm just kind of the belief of like, as long as you don't have to pay him like $30 million a year, I'd go after him. If you can get him for that $20-ish million a year price tag, just do it and shore it up and have him and Quickly and hopefully convince Thibs to play them both together. I think that's kind of where I'm at on Brunson right now.
Yeah, I'll throw out another Toronto guard. I think he's more efficient, less good defensively, Fred VanVleet, which I think the Knicks could really need. And I think he just and look, it's an issue defensively, right? If you're going to play him in Quickly large minutes, like we're talking about, like Thibs isn't going for that. Like you're going to need a new coach if that's going to be your backcourt. And I think if it's those two there, it should be your backcourt because they're arguably going to be two of the 3 or 4 best guys on the whole team. That being said, on offense, like I'd be drooling to see what that looks like because we've discussed it quite a bit, but I think like where you see those ridiculous like on-off numbers for OB and IQ, it's not just because they're both good players. Like they have this exponential effect on each other where like I think they incentivize everyone else on the floor to pass the ball, and their freneticism offensively, like their ability to pass and cut and just like OB creates openings for everyone else just by sprinting hard, both in the half court and in the full court. IQ now with his gravity out on the perimeter and his ability, his newfound ability, like this guy who couldn't get into the lane to basically beat anyone off the dribble. It seemed like down. We'll see if that carries over into starter minutes. I think Brunson as like this hyper efficient hub. And that's what really impressed me. Like, even though Utah, like at this point, not great defensive guards, like he wasn't just getting 40, he was doing it super duper efficiently without committing a turnover either of those two games. I think, like, I know I was maybe this is the boy who cried wolf because I thought the Knicks were going to be amazing on offense this year, but I think they could have a really, really good offense because all three of those guys are really efficient. And you're just going to have like a completely different ecosystem for RJ Barrett to thrive. And if you bring Mitchell Robinson back or Jericho Sims, you're going to have a completely different ecosystem for those guys to thrive in at center. And the thing is, like, if it really doesn't work on defense, IQ is incredibly tradable. I think to Alex's point, if Brunson's making less than $25 million a year, he's tradable for a pick. So I think you get the asset, you get the talent, and then you see if it works from there. But I think at least on offense, he's a pretty great fit.
Yeah. I'd be fine with them getting him. I'd be fine with them not getting him. That's kind of where I land on it. I think he's a really good player. But I also agree with you, Alex, like, where does that leave quickly with Brunson and Rose? I don't think they'd ever I don't think they'd ever trade Rose, since like they wouldn't do that. You know what I mean? Like,
as long as Thibs is there, for sure.
As long as Thibs is there, Rose, I think, is a Knick. Yeah. I debate whether they should get a point guard. If they have an opportunity to get an elite point guard, obviously do that, right? We haven't had an elite point guard since Marbury. You can argue whether he was when he was a Knick.
Yeah,
I think he was for the first like 1.5 years. Like, we just haven't had. I mean, Duham, we had Felton, Billups, like Lynn for that stretch, and then Felton again. Like, we just had like these like stretch of guards who aren't really that good, and it's hurt us. You know what I mean? Like, it's, you know, like, you at some point you need. At some point you're gonna need someone, right? Like, at some point you're gonna need someone at that position who's like really, really good at it. And Brunson is probably would be the best point guard we've had in a long time. But do you want to go quickly, right? Like, do you want to see what quickly can give you at that position? We'll see. I think I agree with this idea of Thibs saying Thibs is always like the best guy will play, right? Which this year the best people didn't play. But if you do get Brunson and you got Rose and you got Quick, the best guy should play, right? You know what I mean? And I think, and we'll see how Quick looks next year, you know, and we'll see. At this point, I do still think Quick is probably the third best guard if that's the case, right? Now, he should still probably – now, I think Fournier will probably have to go. Someone will have to go, right? Fournier, Burks would probably go, right, if they got Brunson. I think that's what probably would happen. And so that leaves a spot for Quickly, I think, a little bit more with those guys out. I probably would pick Burks to go because I actually Fournier kind of actually grew on me a little bit. He grew on me a little bit. So I think that would be my main thing. I would love to draft another wing. I like RJ. I'll continue to support RJ. I think RJ is a good player. I think when he's attacking downhill, he can be a really tough to stop. But you know, he still has a lot of things to work on, right? His handle, his fluidity rather, his ability to shoot off the dribble. There's a lot of things RJ still has to work on. I would love an extension for Mitch that's fair. And if it's not fair, to be honest, like, you know, I like Sims. I don't know if he could start, but, you know, if we can't get an extension with Mitch, I do think we have other options. I'm assuming Noel will never be healthy ever again.
I think that's a good assumption.
Not unfair.
Yeah. But yeah, I would say that, and then for me, I would love to work out a trade with Randall. not because I hate Randall. I don't think like not because I hate Randall, not because I blame him only him for this season, but rather I just think that at their best ideals, Obi's a better offensive player because he can score without holding the ball and he can run down court. I just think if Obi can get to the point where his shot is at 35%, he's a better player than Randall is. And so I would trade Randall. And so that's what I would do. I would try to trade Randall. I'm fine with Brunson. And then draft another wing and then Mitch. Yeah, that's where I think I'd go. And if you have an opportunity to get a star, it depends, right? If you have an opportunity to get a star, try to. There's rumblings. There's always rumblings, right? Like the Mitchell thing, Lillard. There's always rumblings. But if you have an opportunity to get a star, do it. The only problem is who are you going to put with, a star, right? Like we don't have a guy you're going to put with a star. I think kind of we have a type of team now where it was similar to those like early Toronto teams before they got Kawhi, where it's like we keep improving, we have a lot of depth, and then later on we can try to make a trade for somebody. So we'll see what happens.
Well, that's as good of an off-season plan, I think, as I could come up with. Actually, very similar to what my blueprint would be, if we're being honest. So, Jayson, before we wrap up here, do you want to remind everybody where to find your work online, where to find you on Twitter, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, at Jayson Buford, Jayson Buford. I write about hip hop for Rolling Stone, Stereogum, GQ, Pitchfork, Vice, and then I do Knicks stuff for SB Nation. So you can find me on there.
All right. Thanks again, Jayson. Just want to emphasize one more time, just fantastically written piece. I love the analogy of Alec Burks. An actor is too scared to curse on camera. It's like, yeah, that's who he is. That's it.
Yeah.
Really, yeah.
He plays like he's timid in the position. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was a great read. And you cover a lot of stuff beyond basketball. So everyone should go check Jayson out on Twitter. And that is it for this edition of the Locked On Knicks podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe to us on YouTube, subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. Go on iTunes, leave a 5-star review, leave a comment on YouTube. All that stuff is extremely helpful. But until next time, he's Alex. I'm Gavin alongside Jayson. Peace out.